activity that you've done, right? So, places like Vanderbilt will ask these types of questions. And I think it's, again, an opportunity for you to, beyond the scope of the essay, give a little bit more background as to what motivates you to be involved in some of these things that are involving a lot of your time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily about why debate is is a main activity for you. It's more about what's the motivation behind it, what thrills you about being on that debate stage, and giving us that motivation so we can get a better feel for some of the things that might bind some of these things that you do together, and have a better sense for why you're spending your time in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So, so the significant activity is a popular one. Another one that's pretty popular is, tell us about the community that you come from, and more about that background. And for some students, it could be that they come from very diverse backgrounds, or they come from abroad, or that there may be kind of, in terms of where they live, there can be some really unique aspects of that. I had a student who was asking about this just the other day, and she comes from a very rural setting, and so power outages and lack of internet and lack of water and things like that were part of her daily, weekly routine.
Mm-hmm.
And so so she decided that that's what she was going to write about. So I think it just gives you another opportunity to tell us more about you, the person, your circumstances, and what you connect to in terms of that community. And I remember distinctly at Michigan, hearing the admissions officer tell us about how one of his best ones recently was just about the track team, and how that community of people was really important to this particular student, and how they really kind of coalesced together and really supported one another and shared in a way that he didn't have with other sports teams that he was involved in. So that group of students just coalesced in a way that was unusual, and that's what he wrote about for his community essay, which this AO thought was just really powerful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the community essays can be challenging because students feel like, well, I don't live in a community, and I'm like, I promise that you do, and I promise, and there's the high school community, there's the place that you live, there's the things that you're involved in. I mean, and yeah, if you use something that's not commonly necessarily understood as a community, like a track team or some other organization, you just need to explain why. What makes it a community. I'm sorry, I'm about to lose power.
Yep, and that's exactly right. And I think that that when students approach this, I think that thinking about the idea of community more broadly helps them kind of think of some of these alternative options that may not be in the tightly defined community.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Another essay that comes up a lot is why this particular major. And sometimes it's actually
Yes.
why this major at this college. So there's kind of an overlap there. So what are your thoughts about that one?
I tend to look at those as almost always why this major at this college. I think it's an opportunity for students to say more about why the programming for that college or university fits their interests.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some programs that are very broad in nature. Sometimes, with biology, communications is another one, even computer science to a certain degree. And so you may be able to really zero in and say, the reason that I like the program here at College X is because they have such a great faculty that is involved in data security, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a research area that a lot of faculty are participating in, and I can get a lot of experience, great experience, through being a student there. So if you can make that connection, and you don't necessarily have to be as direct about it, but if you say that I'm really into data security, and that's clearly a strength of theirs, then they can make that match on their own. They can understand that sense of match. But then going beyond that a little bit, you can add to why data security is something that you find really interesting, right? And again, show that motivational part and what captures you about that that particular subject.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because what I end up seeing a lot is that students will take this as an opportunity to say, I've taken AP Computer Science, I've done all these activities, and they just sort of list the activities.
Hmm.
Instead, you can say, it's not that you can't bring up your AP Computer Science class, but you have to say, in AP Computer Science, I especially enjoyed blah, blah, blah. And you have a professor who does blah, blah, blah plus XYZ. So
Hmm.
connect it that way, but don't remember they've got access to your transcript, they've got access to your activity list, they already see that stuff, everything is read together. So yeah, connect it really explicitly to something that you've done, but don't regurgitate your resume. And yeah, definitely do the research. I mean, I can't tell you, I don't know how often you see this, Kenan, but so often I see students that I'm like, research the school, and they come in
Hmm.
and they're like, this school X has an excellent computer science department, and they don't say anything else.
Exactly. And when we were in committee, we would often talk about the thumb test. And the idea of the thumb test is if I can put my thumb over the word Swarthmore College and it'll fit for other schools, it's
Mm-hmm.
not specific enough, right? And sometimes you would do that and you say, yeah, this could fit for Haverford, this could fit for, Penn, this could fit for a lot of other Quaker schools because that's the only
Mm-hmm.
detail that you've mentioned so far. And so, it's just not specific enough to really kind of dial that in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have to be an expert, but you have to show that you've done some thinking about it and some research. So,
Exactly.
all right. And then there's some really unusual questions. Frankly, some of them kind of drive me nuts. Like I do not know why University of Pennsylvania likes this question, and I'll read it to you. You
Mhm.
have just finished your 300-page autobiography. Please submit page 217. I mean, when students come to me with that question, I'm like, I don't know. This sounds like an essay I would hate to read. But you, Kenan, might have more experience with this. Not like I'm judgmental or anything. So anyway, what are your thoughts about like that question and maybe other questions like it?
Yeah, I think that they are challenging, and I think that for students, they often will get stuck in kind of a thought process where they're just so limited in how they're approaching these types of essays.
Mm-hmm.
But for that type of question, I think what students need to do is take a step back and say, okay, this is an opportunity for me to say more about what I want to say about me as a person and the things that I wasn't able to include in my main essay. So what are some of those things? It may be about your character, it may be about activities, it may be about your family life, it could be all sorts of different things that you want to include that you haven't had that chance yet. So this is one of those times where you can say, okay, I'm going to write this portion of my autobiography about my family life, right? And about the responsibilities that I have and talk about, all summer long having to kind of herd cats and keep all of my siblings, entertained and things like that while my parents are working. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, those are the kinds of opportunities that you have. And if you just, again, if you take that step back and say, okay, how can I use this format to say the things that I want to say? Then I think that, you'll be much more successful
Mm-hmm.
and utilize that space in a more effective way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that works really well for the University of California essays too, which are not supplements, but kind of seem a little bit like supplements since they don't use the common application.
Hmm.
All right. And so I shouldn't be so judgmental about unusual questions since I have worked at the University of Chicago. Um,
Right.
and I know their questions really drive students nuts, but they give students choices. It can always
They
be
do.
a variety of like, you can take some that are a little more straightforward if you're not a super creative type. So one of the examples was, what is square one? And can you actually go back to it? So I think I'll take a little bit of this one. With
Yep.
essays like this, they are absolutely open to a sense of humor. Like, take your clue from the question itself. And this is, to me, is obviously a question that's saying, like, try and be a little humorous, have a little fun with this. Frankly, take a risk. One
Hmm.
of the things that I really enjoyed when I worked at Chicago is that, and I do want to be clear that it's a new dean now, but I really don't think that this piece has changed. When a student takes a big risk with a question like this, it's really always going to be rewarded, even if the essay itself kind of fails. If you took a risk, that's going to be acknowledged, and it's not going to
Hmm.
be held against you that it failed. And remember, they've still got your Common Up essay, they've got your Why Chicago. So there's all these other opportunities for you to kind of answer things pretty directly. So if you want to go a little wacky, like go for the humor, try something a little experimental, probably not going to be held against you. And I mean, unless you do something offensive, obviously,
Right.
you know, you don't want to get that risky. But like take a risk in it. It's, you know, it's probably going to be, if it works, it'll be a big reward. And if it doesn't work, at worst case scenario, there's going to be a, like, you know, good job trying, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that that in those situations, at least, you know, that's been my experience, is that you give students credit for trying, right? You know what they were trying to do when they took this approach, and so you can give them credit for, if they didn't quite pull it off, then, you know, you can still give them credit for having done it. And I think that it's also an opportunity for students to show how well they think outside the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's part of the point of this type of essay is, you know, how creative can you get with this, and philosophical and different, and still kind of use that intellectualism that you have, but at the same time, you know, be different about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, you know, if you take those types of approaches, I think that it'll certainly reward you.
Yeah. Yeah. Do keep in mind the kind of school too, right? I mean, this is University of Chicago, highly intellectual. So an intellectual risk is always going to be good. Although
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you that when I was there, a student sent in like this whole humorous essay about an evil clown that wasn't particularly intellectual, but it was so inventive. And I remember I took it to the dean because I was like, this is pretty wacky, but I think it's cool. And
Mm-hmm.
he looked at it and he's like, this is really brave too.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, exactly. Like, it doesn't work 100%, but like, look what he did. And, you know, this kid got in, and Chicago was a reach for him, but he had done something really interesting and different. I do want to say again, though, that if that is not you, you can absolutely take a kind of a straighter a question that allows for kind of a straighter approach. And that really is fine too.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And the
so,
nice thing about Chicago is that you can go back to past prompts and choose from all of those, right?
mhm.
So you really have a lot of options there, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of my favorite questions at Chicago was what just really actually was kind of a variation on the neighborhood question, like how did your neighborhood, you know, and form you? You know,
Mm-hmm.
this was, I worked at Chicago ages ago. And honestly, I saw some of the best answers there, and they were very thoughtful. And so the students who picked that didn't tend to be the super hyper creative ones, but they could still do a really, really thoughtful essay out of it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, do not hesitate. All right. Well, thank you so
Very
much,
good.
Kenan.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right. So we're going to be taking a short break, but when we get back, Mary Suyun and I will be discussing writing goals for juniors who are returning to school.